Does your dog have selective obedience, finicky listening skills, circumstantial compliance, a calculated ability to give a autocorrect, but this is because your dog's training is incomplete. Positive reinforcement should be the foundation in your dog's training, but without generalizing commands to all scenarios and teaching an appropriate consequence to not complying with obedience that you have taught, your dog's training is incomplete. So in this video, I'm going to explain the proper use of motivational and punitive dog training techniques. We're going to go over some dog training drama, and I'm going to help you decide which method is going to be best for your dog. But first, let's go over how dogs learn. Hello, this is a message from FreeLance who's editing this. The UK just banned handheld remote collars, joining Germany and a few other European states, so this is an urgent issue for dog owners in the US and other countries throughout the world to be informed on, because banning these types of aversive tools harm dogs and dog owners. So stay tuned so Past Lance can explain to you why that is. Although I'm past Lance relative to you right now, but the last Lance you saw was past Lance, and that is relative to future Lance now, and you might see this present Lance later because I'm not sure how late I'll stay up. Dog's behavior can mostly be broken down into a concept called reward history. Reward history is the accumulation of your dog's past experiences, and it helps them calculate what is the most rewarding behavior to do in a certain scenario. So if a dog blows off, say, a recall command because they find their environment more reinforcing than the treat or reward that their owner has, and they continue to rehearse that decision-making process, they will build a reward history for not listening when off-leash.
It's not just about obtaining a reward, it's also about maybe avoiding discomfort. So say if a dog that is of a person experiences that first scenario of somebody crowding their space and then runs away and gets away from that scenario. The next time they meet a person, they're like, okay, the last time I felt this way, I ran away, and that's the most reinforcing behavior for me right now.
So a dog's behavior is shaped by their reward history, and we can influence their reward history through the proper use of operant conditioning, which is essentially learning through consequences. Operant conditioning can be used in a lot of ways, but I'll let Past Lance explain the basics.
Positive means that I'm applying something. Negative means that I'm taking something away. Reinforcement means I'm making something more likely to happen in the future. Punishment means I'm making it less likely.
Trainer Chad Mackin describes it in a simpler way. Something good starts, something good stops. Something bad starts, something bad stops. A fully trained dog typically goes through 3 stages of training: teach, train, and maintain. Positive reinforcement and negative punishment is used during the teaching phase with low distractions. Examples of positive reinforcement from us include treats, praise, play, attention, but dogs get positive reinforcement from a lot of other things like smelling, running, socializing with other dogs and other people. These are sometimes called competitive reinforcers, and they should not be present while a dog is acquiring a new skill like sit, down, stay, come, or heel. After a dog goes through their teaching phase, then I move on to the training phase, which is where they learn how to perform desired behaviors among competing distractions. But before we introduce distractions, we want to use negative reinforcement to start to teach the concept that behaviors are not just transactions that dogs can opt out of. To move away from that transactionary mindset, I use escape avoidance training, otherwise known as negative reinforcement. First, a dog learns how to escape pressure from, for example, a leash and collar. When a dog performs the behavior, they escape the pressure. Then later on, a dog can avoid pressure if they do the behavior right away.
Yes. 3. Woohoo! Come on, dude. Yes.
So I know that he already knows sit. I'm teaching him that pressure also means sit, not just a verbal cue, but a physical cue also means sit. So the reason that we're doing this is so that we work away from this transaction of do this to get this. It starts becoming do this because I told you to. Your first 2 sessions, 1 or 2 sessions are just going to be this. You walk around, you back up so it faces you, sit. Yes. Zeus. No. Even if he doesn't get it, that expression of frustration and excitement is inherently rewarding in itself. So all of this just amps that up more. So me removing negative punishment. You did that wrong. But for some dogs, they go, I don't care, let me have it. It frustrates them even more. So you can still do that, but if he's amping up from that, I would give him a correction. No, no, good. Say yes.
Yes.
Give him one. Good.
Now I'm going to show a video from a trainer named Zach George. I debated on showing videos from Zach George, but since he has the biggest YouTube audience and he's been putting out a lot of misinformation about balanced training, his videos and training methods are subject to scrutiny. But here's an extreme example of what could happen if your dog prefers competing reinforcers that you cannot control and you never move past using only positive reinforcement and negative punishment.
This way. Okay, see? No. This way. Come here. We're here. So here's another example. He's barking here at the vehicles. Over here. Lippy. I'm gonna just come on. Over here. Good. Yes. Over here. And right there, I tended to get a little peppy, a little playful, to be more interesting than that. Now he obviously went and started biting the leash. So now I've got to try and get him more focused on me. That's the challenge here. Look at this.
So if you are only using positive reinforcement and negative punishment, your training is incomplete because your dog doesn't understand consequences to not listening.
Here. You want this? George. Here. Come. Sit. See how he's so reliable on sit, but in this case, here.
Not limiting my use of any of these quadrants allows me to bring the best out in a dog. So after you've taught your dog to escape pressure and you've trained around many distractions, then you can move on to using positive punishment if your dog chooses not to listen to a command they know. Just like you can be fired from a job if you know how to perform your responsibilities but you choose not to. You should still be using positive reinforcement when they meet expectations, but without an appropriate consequence, dogs will build a reward history for when it is more reinforcing to not listen to you. If dogs receive an appropriate and timely consequence for disobeying commands they know, then your selective obedience issue is solved. So the progression of training new behaviors should look like positive reinforcement and negative punishment to teach new things, then negative reinforcement to change the mindset from bribery to obedience, then positive punishment to finalize the training phase. For self-rewarding behaviors like jumping up, counter surfing, or pushiness like demand barking, it is okay to start with positive punishment. After behaviors are trained, you must maintain those behaviors by continuing to follow up with punishment or reinforcement on the occasions that they do something really bad or something really good. Because if the feedback that you're giving your dog diminishes, so will their skills. So after going through teaching and training, continue to maintain your dog's skills, unless maybe they are a cute elderly dog that requires more quality of life focus than obedience. But punishment could mean collar pops on a training collar, a zap from a remote collar, or just a squirt from a squirt bottle. Different levels of punishment are effective for different dogs. The effectiveness of positive punishment is related to your dog's titration range, which is different for every dog and can vary depending on the scenario. If a correction is within a dog's titration range and it is applied timely and consistently, the behavior should dissipate. If a behavior does not start to decrease, that means the punishment was below that dog's threshold. If that punishment causes any deleterious effects, like confusion, defensiveness, or distress, it was an overcorrection and should not be done again. But titration ranges may vary within the dog depending on a scenario, like the difference between jumping up on the counter to sniff things or chasing a squirrel. A dog's titration range would be much higher while chasing prey. A sensitizing correction would be on the upper end of the titration range. It should decrease or suppress a behavior very quickly, and it could cause lower levels of punishment to be more effective. There's a few principles of punishment that should be taught by the professional if they are using punishment in their training program. If you have to continue to use a punishment protocol, you are either not being consistent and clear enough with your punishment, or it is not within that titration range. I don't think it's right to punish a dog when they are in a fearful state. Punishment is not to be delivered with emotion, it's a means of communication. And often a correction should be followed with direction so a dog understands, don't do that, do this instead. Punishment can provide clarity. Training without using punishment is a little like not knowing what you got wrong on your password that you entered 4 times. It's just a two-way street of information rather than just hearing hot in a game of hot and cold. Punishment also suppresses bad behavior. It doesn't fix a dog's behavior. It doesn't make them stress-free. but it can suppress a behavior enough so that we can start teaching them alternative desired behaviors. Now, to use punishment ethically, we need to follow a principle called
least intrusive, minimally aversive.
Now, intrusion, again, is restricting access to reinforcement. Intrusiveness would be keeping a puppy in a playpen so they don't chew up all your belongings and pee on the carpet. Or for a reactive dog to not go on walks during peak hours or at busy parks. With this principle, I want to eventually get to using the least amount of intrusion. Now, minimal aversion means that I need to be within that dog's titration range to eventually use the punishment as little as possible. An aversive is anything a dog finds unpleasant enough to want to learn to avoid. Minimal aversion means using the least punitive tool for the least amount of time or uses. For example, a dog 3 years into e-collar training might have one correction on a relatively low level every 35 minutes of off-leash hiking. If another dog 3 years into training was still using a 20-foot leash during hikes, I would consider that a higher amount of intrusion. Here's another video from Zach George as an example of attempting negative punishment or intrusion for the problem of pulling on leash and reacting at cars.
It became clear that getting too close to the road really complicated communication, so my job is to go back to the last known place of compliance from Brutus and work from there. If your dog won't take treats, you need to create distance. You can't be in front of a heavy distraction. If they're like, I care more about that distraction than the treats, you need to work up to that. Sit. Don't miss those opportunities to let your dog know when you're really proud of them. So right here is about the distance that he's somewhat compliant in, but we got cars everywhere. Right now, trying to get him to listen on this busy street is not reasonable. We have to work up to that on this less busy street first. Well, now I see a truck is about to drive up here. I see that he's into it, so I'm gonna try and get his attention on me with the turkey. That's not working, so I'm gonna try and get more exciting.
There's no follow-up video that shows that this dog learned how to loose leash walk and how to not react towards vehicles. With the use of effective and ethical punishment, we can reach desired behaviors and help dogs like this become less stressed on their walks. Dogs eventually learn a whole repertoire of behaviors based off their reward history, which weighs the options of obtaining a reward or avoiding pressure or punishment. For example, they could learn that barking and lunging at something that excites them is more reinforcing than receiving a treat for not performing that behavior. And if there is no punitive repercussion that is averse enough for them to want to avoid, they will continue to bark and lunge at things that excite them. Now, the main reason that I'm making this video is to help dog owners dissect the different types of training ideologies there are out there that are at war with each other at the moment. So when dog owners researching trainers in their area discover this argument, or when legislation is introduced to ban certain training tools, I hope the dog owning populace is more educated about this issue. Now, think of training methods as being on a spectrum to where force-free means that they're not using positive punishment, and on the other side they're not using positive reinforcement. On this end we have trainers that are individually harming dogs. On this end we have trainers that are pushing legislation that will overall impact the welfare of dogs in a negative way. Right in the middle is a training method that uses the least amount of intrusiveness and the minimal amount of aversion. Those that use positive punishment might use an array of tools that can help them use the minimal amount of aversion. Now, there's a whole lot of different tools to utilize. A good rule of thumb to understand how aversive a training collar is the more surface area that is touching the dog's neck, the less punitive it is. Now, depending on what the competing reinforcer is, certain dogs with high titration ranges might need a higher level punishment to outweigh a competing reinforcer that they are really driven to obtain. So these tools certainly don't need to be used on every dog, but they benefit an immense amount of owners when they are trained on how to use the tool properly. E-collars are a controversial tool, but they are really a static electric shock, like touching a doorknob, not electrical current. And they can be set to feel like a tingle, to feel like an itch, or a pretty unpleasant zap. But using the right methods, your dog can learn how to avoid it, so it is used minimally. There's also great features like vibrate or noises to get your dog's attention or to use as a warning. Overall, it is the most versatile training tool there is, but the problem with the tool is it's not very user-friendly, as in there's a lot of room for operator error, so I do recommend that you find a professional to coach you on how to use it. A tool that is pretty user-friendly is a prong collar, because the tool does most of the corrective action on its own. When a dog pulls into the leash, it pinches. When they stop pulling, it doesn't pinch. So if there is no tension on the leash, the collar just sits on the neck without pinching. Gentle leaders are also a user-friendly punishment device, despite being used often by positive spec spectrum trainers. In fact, I consider this tool more punitive than a prong collar because even if you slowly introduce it to the dog, most dogs find them uncomfortable. I equate it to probably having a wedgie all day, but they can be a great tool for strong pullers or dogs with high titration ranges. Unfortunately, dog training methods have been polarized. With polarization comes arguments and division, and some trainers and organizations are pushing to ban training methods and training tools because they find punitive methods to be unethical and that their methods are more effective. So I'll get into the ethics later, but first let's go over how effective positive spectrum training is. So next I have a video of Zach introducing a dog that he's boarding and training to a stranger, and it's really awkward.
Don't jump. Yes.
That's very nice.
Good.
You're
Stay.
being a good girl. You're being such a good girl.
Yes, you can
Look
see
at
it in her
you.
eyes.
I
She's like,
know.
I want to jump, but I really also want that treat right there. If you got an exuberant jumper, this is exactly why you want to have them on leash. I know it's weird having your dog on leash inside the house, but it's even weirder to have your dog tackling your guests. What you'll find with most dogs is they will eventually settle down after just 10, 20 minutes.
Yeah, dogs will calm down after 10 or 20 minutes, but this method is just gonna weird dogs out about strangers over time, I swear. That's a weird interaction. Here's a video that I took about how to get a dog to stop jumping on you during a consultation. Okay, I'm going to use just a squirt bottle on him.
Okay.
When he jumps on me.
Okay.
No. Good boy. Good job. So I'm not gonna say off or down or anything like that. If you want to establish that your dog's not allowed to jump on anybody, then you just say no. So this is what I call establishing a law. To where like there's a law against not stealing, right? So you wouldn't tell a thief to put back the thing they stole in the act of doing the breaking the law.
Right.
So if he's breaking the law, I'm not going to tell him, hey, put back the things you stole.
Right.
I'm not going to tell him off. I'm just going to correct it.
There are a ton of dogs out here today. And pretty much straight away, Chop becomes extremely excited by dogs way in the distance. At this point, we are what I would consider very far from other dogs, and to be completely transparent, I'm downright surprised that he's reacting this way with dogs at this vast distance from him. Let's move over here. There's still a lot of value here. I mean, my whole purpose for coming out here is just to let him look at dogs without barking as much as possible. Ideally not at all, but that went out the window immediately. How many outbursts is that? Come here. Over here, buddy. Come on. It's okay. Let me go do a quick walk around the fence. I'll just keep really good control of him, but clearly I have to let him satisfy some of his curiosities right now.
That type of polling snowballs into other mindsets like reactivity. If you can't fix that polling, you probably can't fix that reactivity. I just worked with a client that had a 9-year-old terrier that for most of its life tried to bite every single bicycle that it saw, and they lived next to a bike path. This is how the dog reacted to bikes after we taught it how to loose leash walk.
This happens all the time, I swear. It happens all the time. Usually she'd go crazy. Yeah.
She didn't even like pull a little bit.
Yeah. But it's because we've already kind of changed her mindset and tuned her into us a little bit.
Right. That makes sense.
And we've used some punishment, right?
Yeah.
Very little because she's very sensitive to it, but she knows it's a possibility. Fixed. All right, we're done here. All right, so
You're a miracle worker.
yeah.
I appreciate that Zach is showing his process and his struggles, but you have to then show your triumphs. And here's his last clips of Chop in proximity to other dogs.
Dog's relatively close, but I'm going to do my best to walk Chop away from this dog to help prevent an outburst. Come here, let's go this way, come on. Good man, let's go. Yes. I'm gonna create some distance to hopefully bring him back under his threshold. Look at this boy go. He's doing such a great job of being good and paying attention to me. It almost looks like he's been living with a dog trainer. This takes a ton of self-control for a dog like Chop. He's really reaching deep. But now we've got a whole bunch of dogs coming all at one time. Another dog right here. Here. This way. Come here. We got some amazing traction. These are the breakthrough moments when you're working with reactive dogs that you live for. I couldn't be more proud of Chop. He's come so far in our few weeks of training.
4 weeks of board and train, that'd be around $5,000. I would not be happy with paying for 4 weeks of a board and train with the biggest YouTube dog trainer. Distance is another form of intrusion, and the distance that Zach still requires at the end of a month of training is too much for the typical dog owner to continue to do. Because intrusion can cause more frustration in a dog that leads to an explosion of the behavior that you were trying to inhibit when a dog inevitably gets a chance to perform it. For example, if you restrict your dog on leash to inhibit jumping, they might jump all over the first person they meet off leash. Many dog owners struggle with reactivity, which is an outburst of emotion caused by fear or frustration. There are many approaches to helping dogs be less reactive, and dogs usually benefit from multiple approaches. Then the trainer and owner can lean into what is working best for the dog. For example, if putting a dog into a heel helps a dog not focus on another dog in proximity, that would be the foundation for the dog's rehabilitation process. Some behavior modification programs for extreme cases may start with a dog receiving sensitizing corrections to suppress the behavior quickly. For example, this is Kevin. He and his owner live in a downtown apartment complex, and they saw at least 5 dogs in much closer proximity than the dogs in the last Zach George video every time he took his dog out to potty. His neighbors were so concerned about Kevin's reactivity, the apartment complex required that Kevin be muzzled anytime he's inside or near the apartment complex. Dog owners everywhere are struggling with issues like this, and force-free trainers are letting their ideology get in the way of helping dogs and their owners. If a pet owner or trainer can reach a desired level of obedience without the use of punishment, I applaud you. That's amazing, that's great. You probably had a lot of time, patience, and consistency, and a dog that had behavioral traits that were more willing to accept that type of training method. I'm not discounting anybody's skill level or the amount of time that they put into their dog, but typically without the use of negative reinforcement and positive punishment, your training is incomplete and your dog will have selective obedience. So as a dog trainer, it's my job to determine which tool best speaks to a dog and which tool an owner will easily be able to utilize to maintain the dog's skills. But as long as that punishment does not create any confusion or harm a relationship with a person and is contingent so a dog learns how to avoid those things, you create desired behaviors in your dog. Now there are a lot of other important struggles that are happening in the world, but this movement is important to understand because bans on these tools will have a very negative impact on animal welfare. First off, because bans don't work, and if a tool is banned, people will still use that tool but without the necessary education required to operate it. Anyone that would use a tool to abuse a dog would likely abuse the dog without that tool. If positive spectrum training truly did work without the use of any aversive tools, then all these aversives would simply stop being used because nobody wants to punish their dog, but they weigh the options of a well-trained dog versus one that has selective obedience. Netflix didn't have to ban Blockbuster. The market chose what was more effective. And people are choosing to use tools like prong collars because they get their dog to understand their requirements like loose leash walking so they can get back to enjoying time with their dog. Now, the application of aversive methods does cause stress, but you can teach your dog to avoid aversives if you use all 4 quadrants of operant conditioning. And stress can be a good thing as long as you teach them to overcome that stress. That creates a more confident dog. Even for humans, accomplishing anything worthwhile usually involves some stress. A new job, an education, learning a new hobby are all stressful at some point. Balanced training is an umbrella term, and it should mean that the trainer uses the right balance of reinforcement and punishment. Soft dogs with a strong willingness to please typically don't need much punishment. Dogs that are highly driven by competing reinforcers and have a high titration range may need higher forms of punishment. But training should be based in reinforcement, and your relationship should blossom during training sessions because it sets clear boundaries and it makes it fun to listen to you. Without the use of aversives, trainers lean on intrusion too much. That's actually how animals at SeaWorld are trained, because the trainers have absolute control of their environment. So force-free training could technically work in a controlled environment, but we want to explore the world with our dogs. And to safely include them into as many adventures as possible, we need to set clear boundaries. And typically to set a clear boundary, you need some form of negative reinforcement and or positive punishment. Now, I don't mean to dog on Zach George and positive spectrum trainers too much. There's already enough division between us, and we could use some networking and cooperation. But people with these beliefs are attempting to ban aversive tools that help millions of dogs and dog owners worldwide. When this discussion comes to your community, please advocate for the humane use and education of training tools like prong collars and e-collars. Now, there are plenty of amazing force-free trainers out there, and there are plenty of bad balanced trainers too. I've heard of trainers that threw water balloons at dogs to punish them, and others that have charged up to $15,000 and made dogs more aggressive. But the hard line against the use of punishment is unnecessary and unethical. To talk more on ethics, force-free trainers are taking a deontological approach, which is the belief in universal truths, meaning many of them believe that punishment is never necessary. Balanced trainers are taking a more utilitarian approach, as in for the greater good, and we believe that the use of punishment is for the greater good of dogs. And this force-free rhetoric is causing a lot of damage. Shelters at the moment are being overrun by dogs being returned. This is from a combination of variables, but one of those variables is that dog owners are not getting the help that they need to keep their dogs in their home. Dogs Playing for Life CEO Amy Sadler has a great conversation with Ivan Balabanov about how the use of balanced training saves dogs' lives and improves the quality of lives for dogs in a shelter. Assistance Dog International has one of the strongest voices in the service dog community, and they are banning the use of prong collars and electric collars because of the politics of the matter, instead of seeing it as an ableist policy. Many people with mobility issues rely on these types of tools so that their service dog can work reliably for them. Leaving dog owners hopeless and seeking methods like doggy Prozac from behavioral veterinarians that overprescribe as a business model is also unethical. The American Veterinary Society of Animal Behavior recently put out a position statement advocating against the use of punishment, which is a little bit like Coca-Cola saying all Pepsi products are bad. Actually, that's not even comparable because we're not in the same field. Trainers are not making medical diagnoses on dogs. Veterinarians are not an authority on how to train and modify behaviors in dogs. Trainer Mike DeBruzzo has a very good video on this, where he deconstructs fraudulent claims made by veterinary behaviorist Karen Overall. And finally, it is unethical to mislead millions of your followers with arguments that are littered with logical fallacies.
In learning theory, the principles that govern how all animals learn, punishments and aversion, are actually never required. There is no known instance in the animal kingdom where using physical punishment is required to create new behavior or to stop unwanted behavior.
That is such a boldly inaccurate statement to make. Punishment is required in nature all the time. It's a basic law in biology to move away from something unpleasant and to seek out things that are pleasant. It's a fundamental theory in psychology, the law of effect by Edward Thorndike. Without some balance, nature would overshoot its carrying capacity of resources. This is an example of a false premise. When your thesis statement is so gallantly incorrect, it invalidates the rest of your argument. He doubles and triples down on this argument though, which is another example of another logical fallacy called argument from repetition.
Even though, scientifically speaking, there is no known instance where aversive methods are required, we still see punishments implemented frequently throughout the dog training community to resolve deeply complex issues. But to suggest that aversives are necessary as part of a behavior modification plan or a training plan is at odds with what science tells us. Science is telling us that all behaviors can be modified or trained without the use of aversives. So far, we've found no exceptions to that with any animal, humans included. Okay, if we are collectively able to acknowledge that there's no known instance where physical aversion is necessary in order to modify behavior or teach new behavior in humans or any other animal, what justification do we as professionals have making it part of a regular training regimen? This actually isn't even controversial, but virtually all behavior science, where physical punishment is used, virtually always concludes that there are long-term welfare concerns.
Zach also uses the straw man fallacy in almost every one of his videos because he misrepresents the way we utilize positive punishment and negative reinforcement.
We'll see it all too often online. Someone will slap a choke chain on a dog and be like, ah, look at that. They don't pull now because I just strangled them at the neck for a few seconds, or popped a leash, or added pressure if we want to be diplomatic. Studies done in 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2022 today continue to support that aversive approaches in dog training have with them long-term welfare concerns.
He keeps saying that there are long-term side effects of punishment. None of those studies that popped up are longitudinal studies. I think that there would be tons of lawsuits from dog owners if punishment affected dogs this way.
Because there's a divide amongst us dog trainers in terms of training philosophies, the public is left with this idea that there is not consensus with how we should approach dog training, even though there actually is a scientific consensus.
There is not a consensus among behavioral scientists.
Dr. Stephanie U. Cotty. Stephanie holds a Bachelor of Science in Animal Behavior from the University of Toronto, a Master's of Science in Animal Behavior from the University of Guelph, and a PhD in Animal Behavior and Welfare from the University of Guelph.
Zach was talking about like this huge body of literature of studies that have this, nailed down. And when you dig a little bit deeper into the studies that he's talking about, most of them are actually not research trials. They're not legitimate studies. They're surveys. When Zach said that, the scientific community has reached a consensus, it's not. They're just, it's a false statement.
If you're interested in the scientific studies on this topic, I highly recommend this video from Ivan Balabanov. He's one of the most accomplished dog trainers in the world, and he put together a fantastic presentation on an accumulation of scientific studies. Now, I'm sure I didn't change any force-free trainer's mind in this video. That is not my goal. My goal here is to inform pet owners of this situation, because at the moment it only seems to be getting worse. As dog training is an unregulated industry, our only way to move forward together would be to create a licensure for dog training together. So how do you pick the right training method for your dog? When researching trainers, look for someone who is knowledgeable in how to improve your relationship with your dog. They should train you on how to teach new things to your dog and how to play with them, while developing protocols to set clear boundaries and rules for your dog. For example, the trainer should be able to teach you how to have more enjoyable walks with your dog, but also how to establish boundaries like no chasing squirrels. Ask your trainer what their understanding of Lima is, and if they do use punishment, ensure they are finding the right type of punishment for your dog, as in punishment is within their titration range. For example, if your dog walks great on a harness, then you definitely shouldn't let a trainer put a prong collar on. If you're looking for help with certain behavioral issues like reactivity or wariness of strangers, the trainers that you're researching should have before and after progress videos of them solving similar issues. If your dog exhibits selective obedience often, then your training is incomplete and you'll likely need to find the right use of negative reinforcement and positive punishment. The proper use of those methods will effectively tell your dog no, and that is a crucial thing for a dog to understand if they are to live in harmony in a human society. If you choose not to use punishment in your dog's training, that is okay. Of course, you are allowed to make that decision. But banning training tools and training methods remove the ability to choose what a trainer and a dog owner believe is best for their dog. I want to see dogs flourish with their owners, but more of us have dogs. Many of them are working breeds whose ancestors were busy all day long with a job. Now we crate them all day while we're at work and then expect them to walk nicely on a leash without taking the time to seek professional help on teaching these skills. Help them evolve with us with new technology like e-collars and the accumulation of learning theory science instead of restricting our methodology to fit within an ideology. And with that, I will sign off. I thank you so much for watching this video all the way through. I hope that you and your dog got something useful out of it. If you did, please like and subscribe and maybe even share. And then go have fun training your dog. Yeah, good boy. Get it. Yeah, good boy. Get it. Yeah, good boy, Bowser. Woo. Oh, good boy. Oh, good boy. All done. Good boy. All done. Good job, buddy. You want to get some pets? Yeah, that's my boy. That's my nervous boy. There's a good boys. There's a good boy, Mr. Bowser. Mr. Bowser.